a secret pass phrase, the better. And in fact, much harder it is for an attacker to try and brute force it. So update your passwords to passphrases.
Perfect. We got Mick in the house. Mick, what's the latest and greatest, man?
How you doing, Ravi? It's great to see you again, of course.
You came on last year when we were at the huddle. And I think, it was last year or the year before, and we had a great episode where you scared the hell out of us about cybersecurity and how we're all vulnerable. You gave us a great lowdown on things we have been hearing about in the news about how there's all these different kind of vulnerabilities we have in our daily lives, all the technology and how integrated our lives become technology, and the need for us to become more consciously aware. And I really enjoyed that conversation and really appreciate you coming back on to share some more insights.
Of course. Actually, when we met, we weren't anywhere near the state of affairs that we are now, both from a global health crisis as well as a global security crisis. Maybe crisis is a strong word for some, but the reality is we've now become far more vulnerable. And I'm certainly looking forward to engaging with you in this call, just to get into the details of what's happened, where we're at risks, and what we should be looking out for as well.
Yeah. So I really appreciate talking to you because you do two things. You run your own cybersecurity business and software, right? Yeah. And two, you also do a lot of work with the University of York University's incubator through YSpace. That's originally where we met as well. So you get to see a lot of emerging companies, a lot of emerging technologies. And the cool thing is, we talk to a lot of startups, and on air and off air, and your name comes up quite a bit, right?
I hope in good taste.
Oh, absolutely! It gives us security, gives us instant authentication when a company hears that Mick has been on, right? Yeah. We actually reached out. Once we started this new format of virtual podcast, and we restarted it in the new year. In the end of December, we sent out a whole bunch of shout outs, reach outs to companies that we wanted to have on, but we were trying to figure out how to get better situated and couldn't get on. And they came back and said, hey, I had the time. So many of them came back. I had the time to actually go through your videos and see that. And we noticed that Mick was on. That's really cool. He's a really great guy. And at least 3-4 people this month have mentioned that while we're talking about scheduling them on. So what I really appreciate is that you have taken the time. You're very well understood in the innovation industry within the GTA region, not just in Markham and York or the York University. You established quite a brand. So your voice, I believe, now carries a lot of weight. And one of the issues that are so paramount now, especially now that we're all working from home, not just from our jobs, but even out of the incubators, no longer working out of there, right? We've left this. At least the permission systems that are controlled by larger enterprise infrastructure to our home networks that are nowhere near sophisticated. That are everything's all plug and play, and third-party applications, third-party equipment being used. What's going on? What's the state of affairs?
Yeah, no. So first and foremost, thank you so much for the kind words, and a kind shout out to those who were kind enough to shout out me as well. So since 2020, when we were pretty much going through this whole stage of trying to figure out what's going on, and then obviously there was a global health crisis at stake. A lot of the organizations, a lot of companies, but more so from a mandate of all local governments of all levels, local, provincial or state, or even national. But governments essentially took the bold and brazen step to say, we have to take control of this virus, so stay home, go home, work from home. Now, what that's done from a security perspective is several things. But first and foremost, I think the first one that needs to be identified is the fact that we're no longer sitting inside of the safe, secure moat that we were sitting in before. If you think of it from the perspective of you go into the office, you either plug in or you lift up your laptop or you wire in or you sign in, but you're actually signing in within the perimeter, the secure, very hardened perimeter of a typical organization. So security is top notch. The way it's authenticated, access privileges, etc. Everything is defined. Everything is understood. And even outside threats coming in, they have to break through the moat. Now, what's happened is since we've all been forced home, everyone's working from their home network. And certainly no one, aside from booting up a router, a wireless router, a Wi-Fi unit, no one is really thinking beyond security, beyond the fact that it's the lights are flashing and all of my other devices are connected. So that's the first thing. So we're now working, all of us, the majority of us are actually working from environments that are nowhere near secure as the corporate environment. The second thing is a lot of companies were actually scrambling, trying to provision enterprise level devices, whether it be a laptop or whether it be a mobile phone, but essentially something that's, again, hardened with security, so that when somebody signs in, that they're signing in through a trusted device, that it's secured, and it's got all the right protocols to actually make the right connections into the network. The challenge was for a large number of companies, there was a significant amount of shortages of device. In fact, some companies didn't even have devices, so everyone was scrambling to go and get devices. In many cases, companies just had to release their workforce to go home because of the sense of urgency. We had a short runway to get ourselves organized and prepared. So a lot of employees went home and started using their own personal devices. I want to highlight something because this often gets overlooked. When we talk about personal devices, let's not overlook the fact that either a company provides a laptop or not, but most often companies don't provide other devices that we use to check into work, which is our smartphone. Our smartphone is, in fact, our own personal device. And we don't have hardened or secured protocols on the device. For instance, an MDM, a mobile device management unit, that you can actually contain all of your secure applications for network access, files, and even just reaching out to the office virtually. So the MDMs aren't necessarily provisioned across all devices because it's a personal device. And even just trying to get that done in the wave and the time that we had to all shift from the office to home, there was a laggard. In some cases, again, there is a lot of some did and some didn't, some have, some haven't situations, but effectively we're in a state of vulnerability because we're operating either with an unsecured device, unsecure connection in an unsecure environment, trying to get access to a very secure information, files, documents, and in some cases, applications too. So what's happened is with a state of largely a great part of the world now being forced to work from home, it's actually opened up a significant attack surface for threat actors. So if you go back to what I was saying earlier, threat actors would try and break into that one location, the organization, the moat, spend all sorts of time and schemes and tricks, and very highly sophisticated as well. But now it's become a little bit easier, but also dispersed. So as opposed to trying to break into one network, now if I'm trying to go after a department, I've got all the department heads or bodies sitting at home. It's a little bit more easier because, again, security protocols aren't the same when you're sitting in a home network as it is in a corporate network. So that's number one. Number two. Number three is, in addition to the fact that we're all sitting from home, we've got our third-party devices sitting on the same network. So think of IoT devices. Think of smart speakers. Think of smart doorbells, smart this, smart that. All of these devices are sitting on the same network, and they don't have proper security set up first and foremost. But also, it's incredibly becoming a proven backdoor for threat actors to try and figure out, well, there's a targeted attack that I want to do, or I'm trying to get into an organization, they can essentially just work their way through an IoT device onto the local home network.
Can we talk a little about that? Because most of there are third-party home speakers and stuff, and I really do not feel comfortable for those who are buying those. But most of the home speakers, are run by now trillion-dollar companies, right?
Yep.
Amazon, Google, right? Microsoft, not really. Apple, right?
Yep.
They promise a lot of security. Like Google itself promises titan security, right? It's $2 billion security infrastructure, so that they are hackers will have to hack to that before they can get to the home device.
Yep.
So I was consciously worried about two things. One, not Google being penetrated, but my home speaker being utilized by people Google selling data to, but also like my phone, for instance, your devices, that have digital assistants, they're logging your keywords while you're talking, trying to look for trigger commands, and apps can root that and discover those components and pull it out. So I'm now super conscious about what apps I even allow on my device. I have like a separate tablet that I use for like certain apps, and now my phone, I have a clean atmosphere. But when it comes to like smart speakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would think that it's been super securitized by these large firms. Can you talk a little more about the threat there? Like what happens?
It's an ongoing debate when it comes to smart speakers. There are many in the cybersecurity community who believe that it is highly it is very risky to have at home. But then there's a sort of a varied range of discussions and opinions on where and how the threat takes place. But let's not let's not get actually into the weeds of, well, it happens here, it happens there. The reality is it is very risky, and it can be it can make you very vulnerable as well, largely because conversations can be overheard, whether it be between the device and the router, or the router to the network, or even at the organization at the server level. I'll give you a quick insight, which is both Google and Apple have had to defend their positions against smart speakers, because it's been discovered over the last 2-3 years that employees have access to conversations. And while the one or the other company have come out and said, well, we only get access to a snippet or a few seconds of the conversation just to see, just to analyze, just to measure, they nonetheless have access. So if an employee has access, the risks are that you can have an internal threat or an external threat. But even before it gets to the Apples and the Googles and the Alexa servers, let's also recognize the fact that these are still electronic devices that are transmitting data points, audio converted into data points, and data points converted over to the network. So the vulnerability could in fact lie over between at the router level, or between the router and the network. Now, ideally, and I would probably agree somewhat that the connection between the router or the app to the network is secured, or it's a secure tunnel. But that still doesn't mean that there could be a vulnerability point. At the end of the day, we have seen third-party IoT devices, home monitoring, baby monitoring systems, for instance, have been breached. We saw over the last, I want to say 18 to maybe 24 months, where the Ring app was compromised. And so threat actors or bad actors were actually breaking into individuals' home Ring systems and actually watching them, and then as well as abusing them as well. So we've all sorts of activity. I think that the point is that if it's being done, it can be done. Yeah. And I'm less concerned about pointing fingers to say, well, it's your fault, your fault. I think the conversation really is that it's still vulnerable. So my advice that I would offer, unwarrantedly, of course, but the advice I would offer is that if you have a smart speaker, ask yourself if you really need to use it. And if you don't, either return it or keep it off as often as possible. If you are thinking about a smart speaker, just be very cautious. Don't have it in a room necessarily that can listen to conversations or is waiting to be prompted with a command line, because that's still a listening mechanism as well. The other thing I would offer lastly is that if you are a person of position, authority, but also a person or a target of interest, and I use the word loosely or at least with a grain of salt, you don't want, for instance, a CFO or a CEO or a COO or a CISO, a C-suite executive having a smart speaker. And most especially in their home office or in the vicinity where there could be ongoing conversations around corporate matter or company conversations, sensitive conversations that are taking place, because that can certainly be captured as well. If you have a smart speaker, use it for the time you need to use it and then unplug it. Don't power it off, pull it from the wall socket and just cut the power and just plug it back in if and whenever you need it next.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I mentioned this before to you, but I used to sell smart home packages. I used to work in the energy industry. I'm a Google fanboy, right? Everything I have is Google. The Google Pixel book, it's my notebook. I have a smart speaker really on my desk, right? The Google Home. My routers are the Google network ones, right? Like entire house is networked to that, and I used to sell this equipment. And 2 years ago, I unplugged everything. I removed everything out of my house for a good 6 months to 8 months when Google announced that they were taking on that AI project with the Pentagon. Right, they were going to build the AI technology to manage the Pentagon's new generation of drones. And there was a mass exodus of Google people. There was a lot of people who internally in Google who left in protest to this. There was a lot of internal memos went out. Google share prices hit, and eventually let go of the project. They ended up taking it on again later, but at a lower capacity. That was very quiet. But that really spoke to me because they also took off the masthead, their slogan, "Don't do evil."
Don't be evil or don't do evil.
Don't be evil, right? Don't be evil. Yeah. That's been there since historically, and that was like a real signaling thing. I mean, these large companies, really what they have is trust. They build trust, right? Mm-hmm. And at that point, me as a complete fanboy, Google phone, Google everything, right? If Google made a car, I'd probably buy it, right? Just everything just snapped for me. That trust was broken because the brand, what it meant for, went away from me, right? Mm-hmm. And these companies, they spend a lot of money to develop the brand and ideals, but basically the relationship you have with technology is so intimate that people are naturally falling into these ecosystems. They're calling this it's like neo medievalism. Just like you would fall under a lord, you fall under like a technology ecosystem. That's Apple people who have everything Apple, who they are enclosed in their ecosystem. Me, I'm with the Google side. There's a lot more people who are in between, who use both or multiple products together, and they have their own hybrid systems. But this idea of being completely embraced by technology within one framework, one platform, one company is becoming more of a thing, right? So talking about these vulnerabilities, there are companies who are saying that, rather than, have third party this, third party that, no, have everything within our ecosystem. We have, we be the barrier for you. You trust us, right? And then together we have this closed environment, and it becomes almost like a symbiotic relationship between a human and this entity, this technology entity, right? Like they provide X, we provide data, and together we collaborate, right? And I think that's morphing our society. It's morphing how we're developing technology. But is that the best way to move forward? Like, do we develop entities or bodies that we can actually trust and play a back and forth with us that can handle all components of our life? Or do we ourselves trying to become more digital nomads and become more conscious? And can we expect that from everybody?
Yeah, that's an interesting point you're making, because I think the overarching debate in all of this is privacy. And while privacy and security work hand in hand, the big debate is how much of myself and my time and my usage of your service or device are you gathering to monetize? And we've seen that lately. I mean, as we speak here today, towards the end of January 2021, we've seen in the last several weeks another notable company get a severe backlash globally, I might add, on the principles of privacy. If I'm not permitted to use the name, please feel free to bleep me out. But I'm drawing your attention to WhatsApp, who recently updated their terms and conditions and privacy updates, allowing Facebook to have access to their data. While the ongoing debate, and I'll wrap up WhatsApp and I'll move back to your question. But while the ongoing debate is how much of my information are you giving to a company that we don't, that has proven time and time again that it's taken security not as seriously as it should, and I'm referring to its parent company. We've seen a significant migration of what I would say loyal users who've actually realized that, wait a second, if this was just WhatsApp alone, then I could probably live with it. But the fact that you're giving it over to Facebook, one of the largest companies on the face of the earth, and that is really isn't necessarily the shining example of security and privacy, as it's unfortunately proven over the last while. Given the fact that all this data is going to them, then what am I giving up and what am I not aware of? Right. So people have actually stood up and said no. And so because of that, we've seen a mass migration ongoing still as we speak to alternative messaging apps as well. Going back to your question, while the ongoing debate is around privacy, there's also another observation, at least in the privacy and security community, which is we are inherently driving people to trade in their privacy for convenience, and even the way just products are marketed, the way they're sold, the bells and whistles of getting a new device that can do face recognition to unlock, right? Even just the very principle, it's super easy. All you have to do is just do that, but you don't realize actually what you're giving away. Now, I would raise the concern privacy first, which is if you've got a device that's constantly looking to capture a recognized image, as you're waving your phone around or your device around, it's obviously trying to figure out, is this what I'm recognizing? Is this what I'm just supposed to be authenticating? So arguably, and I'll say arguably right now because organizations and other security professionals would disagree, but arguably it could be understood that it's trying to recognize frames and stitch it together. So who's to say it's actually taking it's recognizing the environment that you're in, right? So there's a privacy until it recognizes what it's supposed to recognize, which is your face, right? So then it either unlocks or it doesn't. The other argument is that from a standpoint of security, that information is sitting somewhere, right? Whether it's a conversation, whether there's a voice recognition, whether it's iris, face, fingerprint, it's sitting somewhere. And we have seen over the last within the last 12 months, research studies done from notable universities across the world. I believe the one I'm trying to perhaps reference, and I'm really bad at remembering things. I won't try and call out the name, but it was a university who actually proved that they were able to compromise the iPhone secure chip, which actually contains encrypted information such as fingerprint, credit card information. It's in a normal conversation, I would say secure enclave, but there's a particular element around the secure enclave that was proven to be compromised, which is alarming because up until now, companies such as the large OEMs have rightfully presented themselves believing that they are in fact secure. The challenge is we're secure as we are until it's being broken. And the effort and time that it takes to break in is happening a lot more faster than ever before. And largely because threat actors, bad actors are highly motivated to either break in and get access to a plethora, a universe of data and monetize it. So, from a privacy standpoint, we're giving up so much for the sell of convenience. But at the same time, when we give it up, we don't know where it's sitting. We don't know who's accessing it. Is it an internal threat? Has an employee gotten really upset with a company and gone rogue? We've seen that notably with several data breaches. Desjardins Bank here in Canada actually took place because of a disgruntled employee. Similarly, with the Capital One breach as well, disgruntled employee who gained unauthorized access in, and then we knew what happened after that. So while we think about smart devices, and I don't have an issue with loyalists of brand or device. I mean, at the end of the day, if a device or a service can make your life significantly easier and it can complement what you want to do, then that's completely fine. But at least be aware of the risks. And while all of these companies spit out, 4 miles long worth of T's and C's, and at the end you've got a little checkbox to say that I've read and I agree, and we know that nobody ever reads through the T's and C's. But while they try and safeguard their position to say, well, we did put it out there, the reality is it needs to be put out it needs to be highlighted. And I probably take the position as similarly to what you see on cigarette packets, very, very straight to the point effects of smoking. We should probably consider having something like that on services as well, which is you could give away your fingerprint or your voice or your face or whatever it may be, but know, in big bold letters that these are the top 5 risks. You could have sniffing or spoofing inside of your network. You could have your information compromised or unauthorized access into X, Y, and Z. But I think people should be aware, because the truth of the matter is, when I'm sold a device, I'm sold as a consumer on what it can do for me. But the inherent risks aren't sold because there's a risk. And if I knew what the risks were, then obviously I might not buy it. Companies don't see it that way. It's all about profit. They want to appease their shareholders, appease the market, and to some extent, I can see why they do it. Do I agree with it? I would say I'm on the fence. But I think first and foremost is user experience. And I don't agree with trading off user experience, privacy, and security for convenience. I think you can change the paradigm. You can change the mindset of the market by saying, we've done this, but we're doing this because we believe you should be secure.
Yeah. So, I mean, a few things to digest there. Love the fact you brought up WhatsApp, because that is definitely a modern day concern. I believe Facebook has, done the worst business move possible, which is they lost the trust of 1 billion people, just by not securitizing themselves. Facebook at a time was one of the very, very trusted brands. People were super happy that you can use a service like that. And now, through a series of miscalculated moves, they lost that brand new loyalty. They've lost all trust. But based on that, I think that the model has become now is, you talk about privacy, but I think it's really about data, right? Privacy becomes an issue when the data is unsecured and unseen, and that data could be, what you're typing to, what you're saying through speech, through your facial recognition software, to your facial structure and all that. Right. So it's a data, and who gets it and where it's stored and where it's going. That's a real key. And I think that is the main key point there. Right. It's like, how do we securitize data better? One of the things I'm really positive about is I'm following the works of Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the modern internet, who pretty much brought the HTML protocol to the world out of the CERN. He's back at it again. He has a new project out that's targeted specifically at this. So his solution is that, companies now, the model has become, we provide you with hardware or a software to give you convenience factor. In turn, we get your data, which we then apply it to intelligence on to make us better, make our algorithms better, make our software offerings better, provide internal learnings, and also provide external capabilities. So the amount of data a company gets is directly proportional to how much intelligence it can create and capture, which directly is proportional to how much value it can offer. right? So a large behemoth like Google can't be outcompeted because they have so much data collection. They have their own ecosystem. That's why they have that $1 trillion offering, right? Right. And so going back to that, how do like his solution is thinking about how can we decouple data from applications? So instead of an application is going there and then being utilized by you and taking the data into back to its home server, how do we keep the data with the person and the software or the system interfacing with the data that you still maintain control of? So he's developing called a solid protocol. It's just like how HTML, created networks, provide internet networking between websites, right? Through this protocol, it's a new kind of protocol for apps where he's creating something called pods, where a user, each time a user is created, they have their own pod that the user then has control over, and all data is stored there by the app locally, and then that pod gives access to that home server to access that server, but the user can cut it off at any one time. Now the app can have its own copy used locally, but the home base of that data stays with the user within their pod, and it's controlled by the user at the end of the day. And if multiple apps are connected to that pod, right, that one app, each individual app can only have access to the data that it collects and it utilizes, unless it asks for higher permissions, which you give it. But that pod now becomes, you as a person now have leverage, right? Data has become the new leverage, just like capital used to be. So now, instead of the companies all just taking it away from you, and your data being considered new oil, you're just being mined, right? Mm-hmm. You're now a reservoir collecting it. Now, as more tools you use, more data is being collected out of you and created, mined out of you. It actually pools into your reservoir first, and you give access to everybody else, right? And I believe like that type of framework, empowering the individual, decoupling the data, would change the market competition again. Now the competition is in the favor of the creators, the technologists, to create the most convenient solutions, the best solutions, to target the customer, use it so we can create that, mine the data from them, but also get access to their data, and then use that to feed their intelligence system, right? Yeah. So it keeps the onus on the technologists to have best practices, while protects and ultimately empowers the consumers, right? Who now have this vehicle for also producing internal wealth, like through data.
Mm-hmm. I'm not actually very familiar or close to that project at all, so I won't be able to speak to it intellectually. But I will say, based on what I've heard from you, and thank you so much for sharing, and you did a good job, by the way, sort of summarizing that. Cool. What I would say to you is, while it seems that there's an initiative to decentralize or defranchise the location of data and who owns it, and while it seems to me that it's set up with good intention, I think the challenge that I would probably see at this point, just based on what I heard, is probably two things. One, if the data and the permissions are set locally on a local machine or a local device, then it won't take too long for a threat actor to break in and reset those permissions or gain access to it. Right? And we've seen it all too often with even just our devices being ransomware, encrypted and locked up, or even just having things missing on our machines. So that'd be the first one. So local device level attacks. The second part is, and this probably is what I would spend a little bit more time and effort on trying to figure out, is if you're then expecting your market base to be in control of who has access in, and somebody's asking for permission to do this, well, how many times have we actually seen something pop up on our devices and we really don't understand too much about it, and then we just go ahead and either cancel it, and then we realize, oh yeah, I shouldn't have canceled that because it's now cutting back the service, or it's not letting me have access to X, Y, and Z. But also, how many times have we seen a notification come up and we'll just blindly just take a fleeting glance and just accept it? Mm-hmm. So I think it comes down to actually educating the users on bringing them up to par with the sophistication of such a service. And I'm using the word sophistication because if an intelligent platform is going to then knock on the door and say, hey, Ravi, do you mind if I come in and access your kitchen? You want to believe that that's a trusted person on the other side of the door. you wouldn't let any stranger come in. But if you don't know who the stranger is, that could be a problem. But if you're in a rush or you're not spending too much time, you still don't know who that person is. Well, that's still a stranger then making access into your house all the way to the kitchen. So I think there needs to be some level of rising of awareness, education, training at the user level. Because the reality is we've got different generations who are actually privacy savvy. I think for the large part, most of us are tech savvy, but we've got generations who just don't care about privacy, and we see that with the mass consumption of social media platforms from I won't name them all, but from one to the other, we've got different age groups who are using it. And if you stop and ask them about, hey, did you think about your privacy? It would just probably shrug it off and say, I really don't care. But what they don't realize is that data is being collected from the time that they've enabled that device or that app or that service until they eventually get off. So let's just say that it's 2, 5, 10 years or so. But that's very intimate, personal content and data that's being generated, which actually is the metadata of that individual. Now, the concern I have just on the note of metadata is that metadata is far more richer and accurate than even knowing you as a person. Metadata can allow through predictive analytics AI what your next desire, step, action, purchase, behavior could be based on what they've determined on past. So if you've got an application that is sophisticated, you need to raise the awareness and the learning of what that entails. There's several companies out there who are somewhat building up or are suited up in a similar fashion, where they're creating a central hub so that anytime a service wants to access your data, they will go through the central hub, but that you would somehow be asked, do you mind if company X, Y, and Z access your data for X, A, B, and C purposes? Well, if you're aware of it, that's great. And yes, while it might give you the sense of control, again, I go back to the first point, which is, well, how do we know then our devices are secure enough that it's not being falsified or there's a compromise on the device that's actually just going ahead and accepting it. All right. So if now you're decentralizing and moving all the information to local level devices, then I would also raise another concern yet again, which is threat actors and the cybersecurity, the security threatscape has proven that time and time again with the evolution of new variants or brand new malwares and cyber attacks and viruses, we'll be back to square one again. Now, to compound all that, let's not overlook the fact of where we're heading to technologically too, right? We're getting into very much comfortable states for state of affairs for artificial intelligence. Quantum computing power is not that far behind. In fact, some would say it's here already. It's just arrived at a mass level, and greater computing power. And we're seeing platforms that are even now 5G, for instance, super light speed. And we're seeing packets being shrunk considerably, making it move around a lot quicker and through less payloads too. So with everything compounded, I appreciate and I think it's great that we are thinking about how do we disperse privacy and authority. But at the same time, there's a few things that we have to get into place before we can actually sit back and say, yes, we've got it. Because I truly believe we'll never, it's very unlikely that we will ever, quote unquote, have it. We're always going to be playing, cat and mouse with threat actors and non-threat actors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you touched on that great part there, right? Like you circle on privacy a lot, and this takes me back to a conversation I heard with Yuval Harris and Tristan from the Humanity Forward project. I think. Have you watched the documentary on Netflix, the Social Dilemma?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Yeah. So the guy behind that is Tristan. He was previous Facebook, left based off of all the work he did there, and he got a lot of flack from his colleagues for throwing the industry under the bus for what they can do. I want to send you this podcast. Him and Yuval Harris, who's probably the best historians, like neurohistorians of our time, is discussing this, and they're talking. So the title of the podcast is 2 million years of human history in 2 hours, and they talk about human development, but also with the focus of technology. And a few key points. Tristan was talking about how we are woefully unaware of the levels of intelligence that can be applied on our data. So what you're talking about, generations being different for their data. Gen Z, do not care. They've grown up social media natives, just like the millennials grew up internet natives. They're social media natives. They're used to giving their data out. They don't care. They're like, okay, you're going to take my data, so what? What does that mean?
Absolutely.
But looking into it, there are now intelligences out there, right, that have been created that they can look at a video of a couple, right, talking for 30 seconds on mute, no audio, and just by body language, the system has gotten so good enough, looking at human behavior so good enough, that it can determine with a 70% chance of proficiency if that couple's gonna stay together or not. Mm-hmm. And how long could they stay together just by their body language, by looking at patterns that naturally exist, but we might not be consciously aware of, but it's been we had to pick up. So we have this natural affinity thing that, oh yeah, machines are really good at being machines. We're human. We're naturally going to be better at humans. The problem is that line is interfacing, where machines are getting better at understanding humans better than humans are, and they can therefore manipulate humans at a wider degree. And Yuval Harris is talking about the history of that. Like looking at the communist or like very controlled systems, right? Centrally controlled systems of the Cold War era. Right? If the government wanted to spy on you, they would have to like assign an agent to every single person in the population to follow them around and capture them, right? And then that person will make a report that someone else will have to refine and create some intelligence out of it. Now, what these systems do is allow for that kind of methodology to be employed much more drastically. And I think that's what we're seeing now with that's the weaponization China has been done with data and AI, right? The average Chinese citizen is completely fine with it. They trust the government, therefore they trust the data collection. It's like we trust our bank not to not have our money, right? We just gotten accustomed when we have capital, when we get a paycheck, we just put it in the bank because that trust is there. It's an institution. So China has institutionalized data collection and deployment of intelligence on that data, so the people can fully trust it, and the trust of a government institution behind it. So I think the main thing is talking about the evolution and co-evolution of technology and humanity, right? Where we can go and where it is going. And you talked a lot about training, right? Like deploying training people. Now, is it enough just to deploy, in schools, have a class on privacy and what is going on, where most of the kids will probably roll their eyes and be like, yeah, I'm on social media, right? They personally aren't feel committed to it. Or do we institutionalize an environment where people become more capable of understanding data? You know what I mean? Like if we institute from a younger level, just like we teach cursive writing to kids, we teach how data moves, how to read data packets, how technology interfaces, right? I think the real solution to this is how do we blend ourselves better with our machines and get us to understand that we live in this blended environments.
That's a really good question, and I believe, and this is a personal belief of mine, that it should be done from both ways, top up and top down. So from top down at the federal levels, it should be part of a legislation or a movement of legislation bodies that actually come in and start getting a lot more tighter on how data is collected and for what purpose, and how machines interface with that too. But also, I think it's very important to have it build it from the grassroots systemically for generations to come. That as part of a class module or part of a course or part of education awareness, it's important for generations to understand what they are about to give up. We've inherently, as human beings, while we're incredibly social animals on this great blue dot in the middle of this vast universe, we've also, while we're being very social, but we also like to have our own privacy too, right? Which is why we have doors, we have walls that you can't see. None of us live in glass houses per se. We all have this sense of I want to keep my matters to myself. But if you've got machines that are actually reading body language, and as you were saying that, I was absolutely agreeing with you, because I think the number is something like only 7% of communication is verbal, right? So everything else is non-verbal. So that absolutely does make sense to me, which is then there's lots of movements on the body and how we react to a situation that's very telling. But if machines are actually reading that, at what point does it stop? At what point does it stop? Right? Do we then become slaves of the machines? And do we all of a sudden find ourselves waking up one morning with Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator running around and trying to handle business? I don't know. But it kind of goes back to something that you said not too long ago, which is, while we have all these services, computing power, abilities, the argument is that we should not trade off the integrity of us, whether it's our privacy, whether it's us as human beings, trading it off for convenience. Because what's going to happen is that we're going to diminish, we're going to lose, we're going to erode all sense of privacy, all sense of self, all sense of self-governance. And that's going to be worrying. Something that just popped into my head as I think about this is in the tech space, we see there's a new emerging area called legal tech, and what legal tech is bringing in are capabilities of, for instance, rewriting contracts, proofreading contracts based on AI. Who's to say that we're going to see the next iteration of that, of writing legislation? But if you think about the human element, well, that's all eventually going to erode and be taken out. And now, if we're going to be governed by AI and software, that in itself is a very strange space to be in, space and time. But let's not also look at the fact that everything is software based. So if it's software, then we're going to have people breaking in and building it or rewriting it or reconstructing it to their advantage. So is that right? So at the end of the day, for now, we are somewhat accountable between person to person, and we have that sense of self-identity. We have a sense of shame as well, because we're humans. We have a sense of pride. We have a sense of governance. But if all of a sudden that disappears, and now we're just answering to I'll just say it for the sake of it, Windows version 20.5 because it's in the future, or whatever it may be, then who's governing that? And who are the lords of that? So it's actually, again, it can be useful to have, but it could also be very scary. I certainly wouldn't want to be governed by a machine or a code telling me on what I have to do and whatnot. So yeah, it's so I think what we're seeing is a movement in a rapid movement in time and even vastness as well of space of technology. And while I sit back and I see all of this massive change at accelerated speed and pace, I'm marveled by what's happened. I really am. But at the same time, I'm a little bit skeptical of what's going to ultimately happen. I mean, we've heard quotes from Elon Musk, who have gone out and said that this is a pretty scary landscape to be in. If we don't take care of it now, we could set ourselves up for big failure and big issues later on.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, then, Ravi, very quickly, maybe we should be looking to the Elon Musks of the world to get a sense of direction as to what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that's something that needs to be changed, because like, going back to that trust factor, right? If our privacy is always at risk and we don't trust the systems and then we naturally then hold off data, right? Rather than think about it, what for a free market economy, especially around data and around technology, what would you rather have? Would you feel like the individual being like they're trying to shield themselves and trying to limit their data, whereas the companies are trying to entice them to get data from them all the time? right? Or would you want people to feel like, oh, they're empowered by it, they're secure and they're safe, therefore they give it out willingly, right? So I think the feedback mechanism there is how do we create an environment of trust and agency so that everyone benefits. I mean, companies do benefit. Everyone benefits when people have privacy, right? People are more willing to interface the technology. People are more willing to provide data. If they have the security behind it, and then the companies who interface with them or the technologies interfacing them get benefit out of that. So it's like a hybrid. It's a synergistic environment, right? So I think the thing is, do you see a credence in like Canada ever developing like a ministry of technology or a ministry of data, right? And that takes on the like from a governmental level, institutional level of looking after everyone's data privacy and security from like the individual point of view, right? And why haven't we seen an emergence of that yet?
Yeah, no, that's again another great question. Thank you for these great questions. So, can I see it? Yes. Can I see it in Canada? Can I see it in other markets as well? Absolutely, yes. And should it be there? I believe if we haven't already discussed it or spoken about it, we definitely should be. And if we have already spoken about it, then we should be moving towards it. Why? I cannot answer that. I think it's a politically loaded question that I certainly am not qualified to respond to. But let me say that we should. While I say that, let's not forget the old adage of money talks, bullshit walks, right? And everybody has to follow the money. And unfortunately, that's the way we have for the last several generations have been. It's been ingrained that money is essentially what makes the world go round. Now, it would be great to have a utopian environment and a time and space where everybody is protected, everyone's able to safeguard their privacy, their data. We're not run by machines. It's a quote unquote normal and beautiful world. But there's also a risk that it could be very dystopian too, because now as shareholders and stocks and trades and as really money is the governing principle behind all of these intentions, that could actually change how we are today to where we potentially could be going. But I would certainly encourage the right bodies in various markets and jurisdictions to certainly start talking about how do we protect, what are we doing, how are we holding companies accountable. It's not enough to say that we find, and I'll use an example, not in bad taste, but just to drive a point. We're not going to find one of the largest companies on the planet face of the earth, Facebook, who makes hundreds of billions of dollars each year. We're not going to charge them $50 million because that's chump change. We need to really hit them where it hurts, right? We need to really get the attention of senior executive officers, not because we've got anything against them personally. No, this is about the principle of every human being who interacts with your product. Example, as a C-suite, are you running around completely making your information available to anyone? Then why, if not, then why are you expecting or are you okay with the fact that somebody else either is willingly doing that or unknowingly doing that? And I think the unknowingly is a bit more unsettling because they haven't been informed properly. So is that misinformation? Is that poor education? I don't know. I mean, this is something that we have to look down. And your earlier question, and I don't know if I completed it thoroughly, was how do we address the system for data collection and privacy and security too? Well, as I said earlier, it needs to be ushered in from the federal levels top down. It also needs to be brought in from bottom up. And if we can meet halfway, I would say in a generation or two, we would be far more aware and educated of what we're about to give up at what risk as well.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that, right? You're completely right. It comes from the people who's willing to make the changes, and also spread the awareness, and as well from institutions who see the benefit of that. And I think we'll naturally fall into that environment moving forward. I know I'm conscious of our time here, and I want to touch base with what you're doing with IamI, right? You personally are
Yeah.
very vested in securitizing people and information. Can you talk a bit more and give us an update about what's going on there?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So with IamI Authentications, for those who aren't aware, we're a cybersecurity company that specializes in access management, secure access management. And essentially what that means is allowing whether it be employees to onboard or get into the network, sign into work, or super users or users with high privileges to sign into critical applications infrastructure, or better known as the digital crown jewels of an organization, but also customers too. So customers signing into their accounts, whether it be banking, insurance, retail, health, education, whatever it may be. So what we're doing, we are constantly engaged with the market. We're seeing everything that's going on. One thing that we've always done is from the get-go of the inception of our company, we took a bold position to never ever touch or get exposed to personally identifiable information. And that is your name, your address, your email, your phone number, your date of birth, credit card information. And depending on what is asked of you that could be tied back to you, we just don't care to touch it. So with what we've built, we've actually tokenized. We've tokenized user profiles. So in the IamI ecosystem, as transactions take place, we will never see a Ravi Ravindran in our network. What we will see is a large string digit token that represents your profile, but we don't know who you are. And we've essentially made transactions that way. So we've authenticated you coming into a network, and we inform the client that actually, let me take a step back. The way it's set up is that it's set up inside of the client environment. The client actually sends us a prompt to go and get authentication. And so we'll route out to you through a series of secret sources and codes that we put in, and we're able to uniquely connect with you. You then respond to an authentication, and the authentication could be done through a form of a biometric or a push or even passwordless as well. And then we'll route that back to our network, back over to the client. And as far as we're concerned, in all of the transactions that take place, it's just a series of tokenization values that go through. So that's what we've done from get-go, and we're enjoying the eye of the storm, especially now that we're all in work from home mandates and lockdown. So it's been very useful to a large number of companies who want to protect remote access getting in. But we're also changing the market a little bit, because now what we are doing is we're making our application entirely available as an SDK, which means now organizations can actually integrate this authentication application into their environment and actually start building up their own zero trust. And when I talk about their and own, what I'm really pointing out is that other authentication companies actually require some form of information or personally identifiable information being registered and sitting on their stack. We're saying to clients, and our position is, it's your user base, it's your data, it's not ours. All we want to do is provide a service that can authenticate in real time. And so we've made IamI available as an SDK, so companies can actually build it in and have their own 2FA inside of their own environment, which is remarkable, which is really exciting. The other thing also is part of the value proposition of what we do is that we enable users to have real-time identification, detection, prevention, and immobilization capabilities of an attack. So, for instance, Ravi, if a threat actor came in and tried to compromise your network or your credentials, you would be able to see it instantly. You would be able to confirm that, yes, this isn't me signing in. You would be able to prevent it, but you'd also be able to immobilize it from future attacks too. So essentially, a threat actor should not and will not be able to get in using your credentials, because you'll be in charge of it. And then we've got other things on the back end that actually take the next steps in further securing the environment too. So we do that from getting into the network all the way to the crown jewels or the critical infrastructures, as well as customers trying to sign into their accounts as well. So
that sounds
pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I mean, is that similar to a VPN?
No, not at all. Not at all. So virtual private network is basically having a secure tunnel from, let's say, your local machine or your local device into a secure environment. And it's not about a VPN per se. It's a little bit about what you were talking about earlier on with that initiative, where they're creating, they're disenfranchising privileges for people to say, yes, you can access my information. It's a little bit similar to that in the sense that we're now informing you in real time that somebody's trying to access your account. There's a sign-in taking place. Is this you? Now you will know intelligently and emotionally that, yeah, I'm not signing into my network or my bank account or my health account or my insurance account. You know instinctively that that's not you. And so we enabled you, then the user, to immediately identify and detect that, and then also prevent it. So no one's going to get into your secure environment using your credentials. So what we've effectively done is that we recognize that you cannot ever. Let me rephrase it again. It's very, very hard to secure and safeguard usernames and passwords. But what we can do, we can make it redundant in real time to the threat actor by giving you that real-time empowerment. So we're basically shifting the control, and we're giving users a capability that even threat actors don't have, which is true real-time empowerment.
Perfect. And if people want to hear more about that, they can find out more information on your website, right? IamI, is it IamI.com?
It's useiami.com. That's USEIAMI.com. Be more than happy to engage with anyone who's interested.
Perfect. Mick, this has been great. This hour kind of flew by. I feel like there's a lot more we can discuss and go into. There's a few cases.
Lots more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Would love to get, again, have you come around for round 3 in the next few months and see, as developments go into 2021, hopefully things are much less bleak in 2020. But, if there's any major cases, I would love to bring you on and talk more about it. And again, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for your time.
Before we leave, actually, if you don't mind, I have a few tips for any users or listeners out there to further secure their environment. So number 1, move away from passwords. Passwords typically it's just a way that we've been raised to think about words. We think of short words. Change it from passwords to passphrases. The longer that we have a secret pass phrase, the better. And in fact, much harder it is for an attacker to try and brute force it. So update your passwords to passphrases. If you haven't already, find out if your service provider is offering any form of two-factor authentications, even if it's the ones that even on our website that we identify as not so good. It's better to have something than not. And very frequently, please go into your browser setting on your machine, whether it's Google Chrome, Windows, or Safari, or another. Clear out your cache. That's also very important too. Those are the 3 immediate things that I want to part with. And if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about how to prevent ransomware attacks or protect their RDPs or VPNs, we'd be more than happy to engage. And Ravi, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
Really appreciate you having coming on. Stick around for a few minutes. We'll do a quick debrief. But everyone stuck around. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.